As a director, I'm always looking at what are the movies that people are going to watch in theaters, what are the movies that are really making an impact with the audience, what are genres that people are enjoying, what genres are becoming more popular, and even what genres are becoming less popular. For instance, over the last several decades, we've seen the genre of the Western kind of fall in popularity, but we've seen other genres expand in popularity. And one of the genres that's been expanding in popularity, that's also being very culturally influential, especially right now, is the genre of horror. And I think horror is actually deeply connected to meaning in life because it deals with a lot of innately spiritual topics, what is humane, what is inhumane, eternal life, important things like this. What is a horror film? I want to talk to you about horror films because I know you watch a lot of movies and you're a film buff yourself. We talk about movies and I'm always like bringing up, I'm a director and you're always bringing up titles that I've never heard of and we watch them and I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
I love movies. What can I say? It's true. If you look at a horror movie, the first question you got to ask yourself is, what is horror? And this question was best answered by a guy named Nigel Neal. And Nigel Neal was a guy who, in the 1950s, he wrote the hit British TV show Quatermass. It was a sci-fi and horror show. And this guy was so influential, both in the genre and in the medium of TV and movies, that he is known as the man who invented popular TV. And he was a big inspiration for a few guys you may have heard of, a fellow named Stephen King.
Yep.
I don't know if you've heard of him. I think everybody
I think
has.
so. I think I see his books in the airport or something.
Something like that.
The name sounds familiar.
I don't know, exactly. Yeah,
So-
where have I heard of that before? Yeah, he was an influence on Stephen King, who is the most infamous horror writer, I think, of our time. Also a big influence on a fellow named John Carpenter, who you might have heard of, who came out with the Halloween series, which was big groundbreaking territory in the horror genre, which they just recently rebooted last year with Jamie Lee Curtis. But he had this definition of horror, and it said this. He said, horror is what you might feel if you went, for example, into a jungle to a place where you had lost all your bearings, where you were no longer sure of anything. And it was a place where you began to suspect that there was something present which you couldn't pin down, something which you wouldn't be able to identify, but which would be dangerous and could possibly destroy you. And this is the definition of horror. And I think if you're going to understand horror movies, you got to understand that fact. But the second thing you got to understand is that horror movies have changed massively over the years.
Before we get into how they've changed, I want to ask you this question.
Sure.
Hearing that definition, to me, one word that comes to mind is fear.
Yeah, fear.
Fear.
Most definitely.
Fear. Why are we obsessed with fear, and why is that a growing obsession?
Well, I think we live in a scary world. I think we live in a very scary world. There's a lot of danger out there. There's a lot of problems. And I think that if we are, back in the old days when you had the cavemen, they're sitting around a fire, and they tell stories. Well, their stories are reflecting their fears. Our fire that we sit around is the TV or the smartphone screen or the movie theater. And so if we are having problems as a society that we're afraid of, then that is most definitely, it's going to be reflected on our screens. But the way we deal with fear is really what's changed over the years.
Yeah, so tell me about this. How have horror films and how has the genre of horror changed?
Yeah, well, there's a very interesting fellow. His name is Andrew Tudor, and he wrote a book called Monsters and Mad Scientists, A Cultural History of Horror Movies. And in the book, he talked about how there are really two distinct periods of horror movies. He had the period from 1933, when movies started featuring sounds, so you could do more with the effects and add more to the suspense, to about 1968. And then from the period of 1933 to 1968, what you see happening is that you have a story that's being told in the horror movies. He calls it the closed plot narrative. And in the closed plot narrative, what happens is you have some kind of monstrous evil, doesn't matter what it is, but you have some kind of monstrous evil that's coming in and that's threatening the community, it's threatening to destroy it. But what happens is you have a group of people who he calls the experts, and they're guys and girls who have great skill sets. They may be police officers, they may be military personnel, they may be scientists, They may be magicians, whatever the genre, whatever the specific subgenre of the genre calls for. But these guys, they learn about the threat, they understand the threat, and they have the skill set to beat it in order to protect the community. And ultimately, that's what they do. They save the community from this monstrous evil. But what you see from 1968 onward is a change that Andrew Tudor calls the open plot narrative. And in the open plot narrative, we have a complete reversal of that. What we have is you have the same horror, fear, monstrosity that's coming in. It's coming to destroy this community, but what happens is the experts fail. They fail. They're not able to stop the monstrosity, and the monstrosity ultimately triumphs. And it's a very dark and a very nihilistic,
much more nihilistic
view. 100%,
view of the
100%.
world. Now, so we've had this change. Why do you think that change has taken place? Why have we gone to this from the closed plot narrative to kind of that general hope of defeating evil to this? What do you think is fueling that post-1968 nihilistic horror film? The evil's out there, it's unstoppable, you might as well just give up now because it's inevitable that defeat's going to happen.
Well, I think it's definitely a change in our societal outlook and in our societal mentality. You know, we have a very nihilistic outlook.
But see, why do we have a nihilistic outlook? Statistically, by almost every measurable standard in the world today, half of the people in poverty in recent times have been lifted out of poverty worldwide. Life expectancy has gone up, healthcare has become better, living conditions are getting better. There's many measurable statistical things that we could clearly point to the fact that the world is getting better. Overall death toll in world wars since the 1970s on, the historians are calling this the long peace because this is some of the lowest body count period in recorded human history as far as people who've been killed in conflict. Like there's more peace than we've had before in a very long time overall, and by all these other measurable statistics, we are doing better. So why do you think we have this more nihilistic view of the world that evil is triumphing? What do you say to that?
Well, I think you're right. In a lot of ways, things have gotten better. But in a lot of ways, things stay the same, and in some cases, even get worse. You know, we look at all over the world. You know, on every continent, in Africa and in the Middle East, and in Asia, we have genocides happening all over the place. Ethnic groups pitted against each other, fighting each other, exterminating each other. You know, we've got the drug trade that's bigger than it's ever been in human history, that's destroying so many lives. We have human trafficking that's going through the roof all over the world. You know, right now in this country, we have an opioid epidemic that's, you know, killing all these people every year in the tens of thousands every year. It's terrible. And, you know, we see the suicide rate that's gone through the roof. We see all these things that's going on. So in some ways, yes, things have gotten a lot better, but in a lot of things, they haven't changed. And what we got to remember, though, is that what has made things that the reason that we've been able to improve and the reason we've been able to keep a lid on things from going completely south is that we have hope. We've had hope to change things.
But you're saying now in a certain respect, positionally, we may even be, though not in all areas, we may even be better positionally, but we have less and less hope. Our
Right.
hope is dying. Hope is getting killed off.
And if the hope dies, then everything dies. If you have no hope for the future or to make things better or to protect what you have, then why try to continue to improve the world? Or why even try to maintain the improvements that you made? Because, you know, if evil's going to triumph in the end, you know, it's a lost cause, who cares? And that's a problem. So if we lose this hope, yeah, we're in a good position right now, but all of a sudden we might completely backslide and go downhill very, very fast. And if we continue to tell ourselves this story that there's no hope, things don't get better, evil triumphs, then guess what? That is what's going to happen. It's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's a very bad thing.
So do you think that artists have a responsibility to guard against this very nihilistic view of the world that it's hopeful? Like what's our role in this as far as finding meaning in life, but also as artists contributing to the worldwide conversation through our art? What do we do?
100%. I think that artists are some of the most powerful people in the world. If you are an artist, if you are a filmmaker such as yourself, you know, you're a filmmaker, if you're a writer, if you're an illustrator, if you're a musician, what have you, I think you have a real responsibility because you set the tone for people. And I think you have a responsibility to promote messages of hope and triumph and not of despair. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a Pollyanna view of the world, that there's nothing wrong. No, there's lots of problems wrong. But because we have things wrong in the world, that's why we've got to have hope. That's so important. And I think that any creative person, whatever you do, you have to have that message. Because, as an artistic person, I'm sure there was that movie out there, or that story that you read, or that picture that you saw, or that song that you heard, where you were going through a tough time in your life, and you didn't know if you were going to make it, but you saw that thing that was created by somebody, and you said, yes, you know what, I can make it, I can do this. It's going to be okay. I can get through what I'm going through. I can triumph, and I can go to the next stage in my life. That's so important. If you're an artist, the thing that you're making, it might be that thing for that person that is going through a tough time and needs that message, and they see your piece that you've created. And that's so important. You've got to have that. You've got to have that. If you make something that doesn't do that, they hear your thing and think, well, nope, why should I care? And then that's terrible. That's terrible. They stop progressing in their life, and they stop, they give up hope, and they don't triumph over their issues. They let their issues triumph over them. You can't do that. So as artists, we have such a responsibility to promote messages of hope and triumph, not of despair and not of nihilism.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Just yesterday I read a script, a phenomenal script. It was a World War II script that took place in one of these Nazi prison camps. It was Auschwitz, actually. And the whole thing is centered around destroying people's hope. And if you can ultimately destroy someone's hope, you can destroy the person. And I think it's true in a Nazi prison camp, but it's true in suburban America as well. If we can destroy hope, you've ultimately lost your purpose to live. You lost your meaning in life. So
You've got nothing. You're a dead man walking. And that's not what we want. That's not what we want. You want hope. You want triumph. You don't want to give up to the forces of darkness. Because you know what? If you do, that's it. People depending on you, they don't have you anymore. But if you maintain hope, you will ultimately triumph. And that's something that we've all got to do.